All right, I would like to explain Jim Rutt's idea on how we could actually implement something like liquid democracy given the current system. And I'll link below to his original article on this. I also highly recommend the Jim Rutt Show if you're interested in systems thinking and the sorts of ideas we talk about on this channel. But I think this idea is the solution to a couple of different related problems. And the first of these problems I think is best articulated by Lawrence Lessig in his TED Talk, which I will link to below, or in one of his TED Talks. And the basic idea here is that there are some policies that we could implement that would be broadly supported by the population. Like that it wouldn't just be a 55% support, but like if you actually asked the population, the vast majority of people would support that policy. But those ideas and those policies don't get brought up in Congress because they are against the interests of the powers that fund Congress. So, and he provides some evidence about that in terms of the policies that pass in Congress tend to be the policies that the financial elite supporting Congress support, and they're much, much less correlated with the support of the general public. So I highly recommend that TED Talk. I'm not going to fully expound on that idea here, but I think that's one of the main problems that I'm worried about, that this idea from Jim Rutt is trying to think through how could we solve this problem. And then the second problem that Jim Rutt's liquid democracy idea starts to address is the notion that there are a lot of people out there, like myself, who are experimenting with what are some different formats of governance that might eventually be strong, that could actually improve our democracy if we were to implement them. And, but a lot of times these conversations end up sounding very utopian, where it's like, that's maybe a great idea, but there's no way we could just come in and implement something like that in the current system. We're kind of stuck inside the current system. So you need a vision for how do you get from the current system to a system that has some stronger properties protecting democracy, protecting these values that we hold in liberal democracies. And it's not that I think this particular idea is the idea that will move us from one version of the world to another that's stronger. It's rather that I think this idea represents the kind of thinking we should be doing if we want to move ourselves from the current system that seems so entrenched, and I would argue is entrenched, to a new democratic updated space. Okay, so first, what is liquid democracy? And I have another video that really explains this more fully, but the basic idea is it's a little bit like a direct democracy, where every person has the right to vote directly on any ordinance that comes up. But if they would like to pass that vote along to someone with more expertise in a particular area, they can do that. So like you might imagine if there's bills coming up on healthcare and on cryptocurrency regulation and on, international relations, whatnot, you could say, actually, the healthcare system is something I don't have expertise in. I'm not really interested in doing the depth of research needed for me to make an informed vote on that. But I listen to people, and there's one person that I kind of trust on healthcare. So I'm going to pass my vote along to them, and they can vote on my behalf. And of course, sometimes you might be like, here's someone that I generally trust, just like a representative, to allocate my votes to the healthcare person, the crypto person that they know of. So you might just treat this vote like a representative democracy vote, where you say, I want this person to allocate all my votes to the appropriate experts. That's the basic idea. See the other video for a more detailed explanation. But for now, I'm really focused on Jim Rutt's ideas for how to implement this. And the idea here is that somebody could run for Congress under the current system. And they could say, I promise that I will vote whatever the results of the liquid democracy system are. So for every bill that comes up, instead of wheeling and dealing between the two political parties that are sort of entrenched and have this negative dynamic, this person says, anyone who signs up for this particular liquid democracy app and votes in that way, I will vote however the results of that liquid democracy app turn out. So they're sort of promising to carry out the will of the public. Now, of course, this whole idea depends on having an app of some sort or a social media site or whatnot that accurately implements liquid democracy. And there's all kinds of questions that arise when you think about that. Is this just for the people who sign up for the app? In which case, your vote may be more about the types of people who sign up for that app. Or does the app try to come up with a representative sample and sort of weight each person's vote within the app according to the populations they represent? Well, that brings all kinds of problems with it. So I do think developing the app that this hypothetical senator would use when she chooses her votes, that would be a trick. And you would have to figure out how to make that work effectively. But if that person's allegiance was to that liquid democracy experiment rather than to a particular political party, I think there's a lot of hope in sort of how that might play out, that the process of developing such an app, I think, actually could end up being the more important part of that story. And I think this could potentially, like maybe there's a very small sliver of a chance, but potentially lead to a system where more and more people adopt this. Now, I would actually like to lay out the argument that I think the app itself might be the more important part of that story. Because one of the problems we have right now is that everybody's sort of stuck in their political tribe because they fear the other tribe so much. And yet they may not like the candidate from their tribe, or they may not even like what that particular political party is doing in Congress. And I think if people saw that actually there's a lot of people who are sort of fed up with both parties, and they're expressing their views in this app, they're perhaps coming to consensus about which topics does the vast majority of the population support that might go against existing powers. The information that would be generated by an app like that could eventually, I think, become part of the conversation around policy and around elections and whatnot. And at a time when people are perhaps hungry for different alternative views, an app that aggregates people's views and organizes people's views and just says, here's what we think, according to this liquid democracy, is supported by a lot of people. That information, I think, by itself could have an effect on the dialogue for sure. And once again, organizing this app and figuring out how do you even organize the dialogue on this app? Like, do you have links to commentators that you find useful? Is there a way of organizing people's different beliefs on particular topics and breaking down what are the relevant questions? I could see, even if this app sort of started as a liquid democracy app, I could see the main thing about it developing to be, what is the way that policy conversation happens on that app? And there are all kinds of ways that could sort of veer off in the wrong direction and develop its own biases so that nobody trusted it. And of course, there would be powers that would try to intentionally create that distrust, for sure. But if that experiment could update itself, learn, try to reach out to different groups to make sure there's broader representation on the app, if people building that were intentional about how they went about it, I do think this could at the very least change the conversation